Welcome to the Solemn Vanguard channel. Today we go over my tier list predictions / observations for the post GBT13 meta. But first, a message from our sponsor. Sponsored by Royalty Playmat Designs, the perfect way to get a custom playmat made to your specifications, characters, logos, symbols, text, play zones, or the name of your bunny. Anything is possible. They also have some really cool pre-made playmats in their store. Links will be in the description. Now, before we get into this, I know these kinds of videos spark heated debate, ranging from
tier lists are bullshit, this deck should be there, not there, tier 1.5 doesn't exist, English meta is totally different from Japan meta,
all the way to suicide jokes. So let me make this clear. This is a tier list prediction video based on my observations in loads of Vanguard forums, my personal games, and a combination of tournament results in Asia and the West. So, from now on, I will categorize the tiers as follows. Tier 1, the best decks. They're totally relevant and have multiple results and tops backing their potency. Tier 1.5, these decks can still compete and we see them topping but not as frequently as Tier 1 decks. Tier 2, everything else. Keep in mind, the decks in each category are in no particular order. I used to also have a Tier 3, but there's no point in mentioning subclans that have been dead for 2 centuries. Sorry. If you believe Tier 1.5 doesn't exist and you can't control your fingers when you angrily start typing your superior views on the game, please, whenever I say Tier 1.5, you just hear Tier 2. And whenever I say Tier 2, pretend like you heard Tier 3. I wouldn't want to give you a restless night, you know. Getting into the video. On Tier 1, we have our famous newcomer, Overlord. Now, this deck seems to be controversial because some people live in the illusion that it sucks, but it seems the whole continent of Asia wildly disagrees with you. This deck could potentially be the very best deck of the format. It disrupts so many decks that used to be hard tier 1s, and it's practically free damage and 5 drive checks and hand trap cards truly make it an insane deck. Meanwhile, it couldn't care less about Chaos because it's so Vanguard centric, which leads us into our second deck on the list, Chaos. Also a newcomer, Chaos got some much deserved support in the clan booster and maybe even a little too much. Completely destroying any dreams Battle Sisters and Blasters may have had, this deck shreds any rearguard centric deck to pieces, and considering they're getting another round of support in the Stargate booster, it looks like they're here to stay. These two decks, being the potent control gods of our new tier list, have also brought another friend back from the dead, Savas. Why? Aquaforce as a whole got some really solid support in Booster Set 13, but the main reason Tavas truly shines now is because it is one of the few decks that can actually cope really well with these two control god decks. It's still a really annoying matchup, don't get me wrong, but Tavas has some tools. New Tavas ability destroys any Denial Griffin dreams Overlord may have had. Shipra, Melania and Ortia all have resist. Some people even play the new Freestyle Rider, which has resist and gets power for all your resist. Resist Force really gets to shine now. We'll see for how long as Bushi starts printing cards that can get around it. Next up is ZTB. In my humble opinion, this deck was pretty much the best deck after G Booster Set 12, and while it is still insanely potent, it really doesn't like dealing with locked and or retired fields. It can luckily fall back on Gear Next and Groovy to turn into a semi-Vanguard centric deck, and overall it still shits on every other deck that isn't Chaos or Overlord. Now, another deck that I was actually attacked over is Vanquishers. Now, last tier list, I put Vanquishers in the honorable mentions between tier 1 and 1.5. I was met with quite some ridicule for that, but oh look, it topped twice in the World Grand Prix and multiple times in various VGCSs. Whilst I still believe this isn't one strong tier 1 deck, some of the past results pretty much make it deserve a spot. It also heavily shits on some of the decks in tier 1.5 and pretty much nukes anything in tier 2. That's why I'm keeping it in this odd purgatory between 1 and 1.5. I'd also like to put Deleters here because it seems that deck is ridiculous when piloted well, but hard to pilot. But that's what various Japanese meta judges say at least. Getting into the actual tier 1.5, a lot of decks actually joined this tier purely because they can deal with our two control god decks, and then a lot of earlier tier 1 decks joined this list exactly because they can't deal with the god control decks. So we got this odd pyramid where we have old solid decks turn 1.5 because they lose to the god decks but win from everything else, and we have old okay decks turn 1.5 because they win from the control control decks but lose from old solid decks. So I'd like to make a little division here. I'll just list all the decks that are in here, despite them getting nuked by the God control decks. The decks that are in here because they have a good matchup against the God control decks, and then the decks that are in between. So the decks that have a problem with the control, the two main great decks that were pushed down are Battle Sisters and Blasters. These two decks generally just crumble the minute they face Chaos or even Overlord. To my great surprise, Blue Wave has also been topping in various VGCSs, but I'm still unsure whether that's because of hype surrounding the subclan. It really can't deal with Chaos. Genesis Wiseman also joins this tier because they hate Chaos and Overlords, but they still top really frequently in Japan and shit all over most decks on this list. Now, the ones that really don't care about control, or at least not a lot, are Harry and Night Rose. They have made their return to the VGCS tops. Well, return, Harry was never there to begin with, so welcome, because they barely care about Chaos and only care a little about Overlord. Now keep in mind, these two decks actually got their new strides, which help them get around stuff, so this might not be the same for English until those two cards arrive. Tachikaze is also definitely part of the 1.5 Brotherhood because of how they can wipe their own field, and the new Golden Gaia does fuck with Link Joker. Now in the middle, the ones that like kinda care but then kinda don't. First off, Luard. He was pushed into 1.5 because they heavily rely on rearguards to do their thing, and having lots of locked circles really ruins them. Apart from that, they generally lose their Luard on stride against both Overlords and Chaos, which makes their engine slower. Luckily, they're still relatively Vanguard centric, and so they could do pretty okay still. Dark Irregulars in general are in a very solid spot, but Enigmatics being Denialed Griffin isn't very fun, nor is a locked front row, shutting down any form of offense they might have. Luckily they do have Gilderet and Bledermaus. Tsukuyomi and Susanoo are also in here because they can still abuse Stillwater and have been topping way more. Nubatama Dominate also joins the fun because it's still solid. And finally, I'd like to put Zero Damage Glendios here because they do perform well in various VGCSs but don't seem to seal any top 3s. As for tier 2, that's basically every other deck. Of course there are better and worse decks, and you could say some decks are tier 50, but as far as really competitive Vanguard goes, that matters less. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please subscribe to the Solemn Vanguard channel for more and click the bell button to stay up to date. Like the video if you liked the video and let me know down in the comments if I missed anything or if you have some thoughts. Let's get some discussion going. Ciao!